Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the articles that we are going to pick up from the Delhi edition of the Hindu. Today we have 8 important articles. There are 5 articles relevant for mains and as well as for prelims that require a detailed analysis, and 3 small articles which are important only for the prelims exam. So let's cover all these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are benefiting from our initiative, do support us with your likes, your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And also, do join our official Telegram channel by scanning the QR code or by clicking on the link provided in the video description. Because after the session ends, we provide a daily quiz on these topics. This would be the easiest way for you to practice these topics, practice MCQs in order to prepare for the upcoming prelims and revise these articles again. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a very interesting column on page number 6. This article focuses on the new statue of Lady Justice or the new statue of Justitia, which has been adopted by the Supreme Court of India. The writer, who is an expert not only in legal matters, but is also an expert on iconography and symbolism, he examines the importance of the new symbol of justice that has been adopted by the Supreme Court of India recently. So let's understand this topic in complete detail. But first, the background. In September, Supreme Court completed its 75th anniversary. To mark the 75th anniversary, the Supreme Court had decided to shed its colonial image and the colonial hangover with regard to the symbolism and artwork associated with the Supreme Court. Be it the insignia and the flag of the Supreme Court or even the statue of Lady Justice or Justitia. So in September, the Supreme Court of India adopted a new flag and insignia which was launched by the President of India. This new flag that you can see over here is depicted on a blue space, a blue colored flag that carries the Ashoka Chakra along with the historic building of the Supreme Court of India, and you can also see the sacred text as far as Indian democracy is concerned, that is nothing but the Constitution of India. So this new flag and insignia carries a lot of symbolic meaning. It signifies not only Indian ethos and the rich Indian civilizational heritage and removes the colonial hangover on Indian institutions, but it also symbolizes the principles of justice and democracy. On this new flag, you can also see a Sanskrit phrase which has been added, Yato Dharmastato Jaya, in Devanagari script, which essentially means that where there is dharma, righteousness or justice, that is where victory can be found. So this is a very powerful statement. It symbolizes the role of the Supreme Court itself as the guardian of the Constitution to uphold rule of law and to secure justice in a democratic state. This flag and insignia was designed by the National Institute of Fashion Technology. Now, why are we covering these basic facts and the background? Because there can be a possible prelims question. Now, coming to the new statue of Lady Justice. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the old statue of Lady Justice, which was seen not just in India, but it is seen even today around the world. Around the world, this particular statue on the left, which draws inspiration from European mythology, from the Romans, the Greeks, and later even the Egyptians. This statue has come to symbolize the impartiality of law, where you see a woman clad in white European dress, carrying a sword in one hand and the scales of balance in the other hand. The balance depicted by the scales, it basically shows that the judiciary is supposed to look at both sides of the argument. The judiciary is supposed to look at the argument presented by both sides involved in the prosecution and give a fair hearing. And the sword represents the ability of the judicial system to deliver punishment, to uphold rule of law, to maintain the rule of law by delivering the required punishment as per the established laws. Now, this statue that you see on the left has gone through various changes through history, and it also has different interpretations. Now, since India was a British colony, this European culture was inherited into our judicial system. The British placed this statue of Lady Justice, which can be traced back to Roman mythology, in Indian courts as well. And post-independence, the tradition had continued. But now, there has been a big change which has been introduced. Under the guidance of former Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, in October, the Supreme Court brought out the new statue of Lady Justice or Justitia. You can clearly see the Indianization of the statue, where Lady Justice is seen to be wearing an Indian sari with a crown on top, and you can see the scales of balance being retained as it symbolizes fairness in the judicial process, where the judiciary will look at both sides of the argument and gives a fair hearing to both the sides or both the parties. But the sword has been replaced with the sacred text, the Constitution of India. But one important change, the most important change, has to do with the blindfold. The European version of Lady Justice, which has been prevalent around the world, has often been blindfolded. And there is a very interesting history behind it, which I am going to explain in detail in a short while. But generally, in medieval modern times, the statue of Lady Justice has been blindfolded, and it symbolizes something very important. Now, the new statue which has been adopted by the Supreme Court of India gets rid of the blindfold. The Chief Justice of India said that the blindfold in a way symbolized the inaction of the judiciary as well. And that is something which was a result of the colonial hangover, and that is something we should have gotten rid of. So the new statue gets rid of the blindfold, symbolizing the fact that the judiciary is open. It is looking at the society, looking at all the sides of the argument, and trying to be impartial to deliver fair justice. Now let's dive a little deeper into the symbolism and the history of the statue. Some of you might think, why is this relevant for the exam? I'll come to that point at the end of the discussion. The writer presents a beautiful argument as to why the symbolism, the iconography, and the art value of such statues matter in public life. Now, if you look at the statue of Lady Justice, which has been historically used around the world, as I told you, it traces back its origin to Rome. In Roman mythology, the goddess of justice, Justitia, is believed to deliver fair justice. It is this goddess which has been depicted in this European version of the statue of Lady Justice. So this is where the modern statue of Lady Justice draws its inspiration from, essentially from Roman mythology that depicts the Roman god of justice, Justitia. This has acquired different forms and interpretations in Greek mythology, in Egyptian mythology as well, and it became widely prevalent across Europe during medieval times. But however, the symbolism and the interpretation changes from time to time, from context to context, because eventually the symbolism of any art lies in the eyes of the beholder. How the viewer interprets the symbolism of a particular artwork is what matters. So there has been a positive connotation involved, with regard to the European Lady of Justice, there has also been a negative connotation as well, a negative interpretation as well. Now, if you look at the Roman coins, which date back to 1st and 2nd century, they depicted the statue of Justitia without the blindfold. The writer correctly points out that there are versions of Lady Justice historically being depicted without the blindfold as well. So the question is, when was the blindfold introduced? And what was the symbolism behind it? Now, before we look at that, let me tell you what happened during the Renaissance period in 14th century, at the turn of 14th century. During the Renaissance period, it was widely perceived that justice was not fair, it was not equal. It was believed that the judicial system in Europe, which had evolved at that point, was seen to be favoring the rich, the elite, and the powerful. And it was seen to be discriminating against the weaker classes. So during the Renaissance period, it is believed that as a satire to highlight the corruptness of the judicial system, the blindfold was added to the statue of Justitia to highlight that justice is blind, that justice is blinded. It is favoring only the rich and the elite. That was the initial negative connotation involved. But later, few decades later, during the Enlightenment period in Europe, around 17th, 18th century in medieval Europe, this interpretation was given a positive connotation. The blindfold came to represent impartiality of the justice system. The blindfold was a symbolic representation that the judiciary will not discriminate. The judiciary doesn't care whether a litigant is rich or poor. The judiciary doesn't care about the religion, the race, or ethnicity of the litigants. So the blindfold was given a positive connotation somewhere around 17th, 18th century. So if you look back at history, the statue of Lady Justice has gone through various changes and it does have various interpretations. It does represent the power of the judicial system to punish the guilty. It represents the power and authority of the judicial system, especially the sword which is held by Justitia in this European depiction of the statue. It symbolizes the authority of the judiciary. It symbolizes the role of the judiciary in upholding rule of law and how it can even punish the guilty if necessary to protect the rule of law. As I said, the scales over here, which is held up to the eye level of the goddess, it symbolizes the balance in the judiciary. The judiciary will look at both sides of the argument and give a fair chance, a fair hearing to both the litigants. So this has been the European version of Lady Justice. Now the big question, what was the need to change the statue? Why did the Supreme Court of India feel the need to carry out a complete overhaul of the statue of Lady Justice? The reason lies in our colonial past. As I mentioned earlier, it was during British rule that the statue of Justitia was introduced into India's judicial system. Since British law was based in European context and India inherited the British legal system, the British introduced the statue of Justitia and placed the statue prominently at all the courts in the country to symbolize the fairness and impartiality of the justice system. So now, post-independence, we had inherited the same statue with the same symbolism. So there has been a cultural revival in India, a debate going on in India from several years, that should we decolonize our institutions as well? Should we bring in more Indian values, Indian symbolism into all our public institutions, from bureaucracy to the parliament to the judiciary? And of late, we have seen many such changes happening, be it the insignia of the armed forces, which has gone through Indianization, and we have shed the colonial vestiges. Right? Under the Modi government, we have seen a transformation of the insignia of the armed forces and various public offices and institutions. So in line with this trend, the Supreme Court felt the need that the country needed a new statue of Lady Justice. We need not call the statue Justitia. Justitia is a European goddess particular to Roman mythology. That is something we need not inherit. So that is where the need was felt to Indianize the statue of justice, to shed the colonial image and the vestige, the colonial hangover, and to bring a sense of Indianness into the justice system. Hence, the statue now bears a sari depicting a Devi or a goddess, a clear inspiration from Hindu mythology. The scales have been retained. The scale continues to represent the balance of the judiciary, the fairness of the judiciary, the fair treatment that you can expect from the judiciary. But however, the sword has been replaced by the most powerful document in the country, the Constitution of India. And the biggest change is that the blindfold has been removed. So as I mentioned, the Chief Justice, the former Chief Justice of India, stated that the blindfold was also having a negative connotation that the judiciary is corrupt, that the judiciary is only looking at some sections of the society, favoring some sections and discriminating against the rest. So it made absolute sense to get rid of the blindfold. And this symbolizes that judiciary is now open. The judiciary sees everything. It sees everyone. Right? Of course, with fairness, with the balance that is necessary. That is the intention behind the changes that have been done to the statue of Lady Justice. But the writer raises a very important counter question as well. The writer points out that historically, be it from Roman civilization, the Greeks or the Egyptians, as I said, the blindfold has represented different things at different times in different contexts. Now, if you look at the writings of Martin J. in Must Justice Be Blind, written in 1999, he points out that images of Lady Justice did not always cover the eyes of the goddess. That's exactly what we studied. That historically there is evidence to show that the statue has not always been blindfolded. It was added later as a satire, particularly during the Renaissance period at the turn of the 15th century. That is when the blindfold was added to show that the judiciary is corrupt. The judiciary was only favoring the rich, the elite, and the upper classes and discriminating against the weaker classes. It was only later that a positive connotation was given to the blindfold in medieval Europe. Around 17th, 18th century is when the positive connotation was brought in to the blindfold that was added to the statue of Justitia. So the blindfold did represent impartiality. It clearly showed that judiciary doesn't favor any individual or any organization or any community. Rather, it looks at everyone fairly, equally. So it symbolizes equality. It symbolizes rule of law. And now that we have gotten rid of the blindfold, will it open the path for different interpretations? Because on social media, there has already been a lot of criticism against these changes. The writer points out that on social media, there are certain arguments that removal of the blindfold possibly represents that the judiciary will not be fair. This largely stems from maybe the experience or the perception of some people who might have had a bad experience with the judiciary, who might have a sense of insecurity, a sense of fear that they might be discriminated under the judicial system, maybe because of their religion or because of their caste or because of their social status. So, as I said, in any artwork, symbolism and interpretation is always about how you view the artwork. It depends on the perspective that you're coming from. So if a lot of people feel that the removal of the blindfold could in a way represent the possible corruptness of the judiciary, right? That shows the perception of a large section of the people in the country that judiciary is not entirely impartial. The judiciary is not entirely fair. So they might be the ones who are pointing out on social media and other platforms that this change reflects the partial behavior of the judiciary where it appears to favor certain sections, where it appears to leave out other sections of the country. Now, this is not just about litigants. Don't forget, judiciary is beyond the litigants. It's about the judges, the lawyers. It's about having access to the judicial system. Now, you tell me, if you look at the judicial system in the country, won't you find a sense of imbalance as far as representation in the judiciary is concerned? For example, if you, let's say, take a look at the caste-based representation of judges at lower courts, higher courts, and at the Supreme Court eventually. If you look at the representation of judges from different castes, there will be a definite imbalance amongst different castes. Data shows that the judiciary has often been dominated by the upper castes, whereas the lower castes, the Dalits, scheduled tribes, having barely any representation. For example, you take the gender inequality present in the judiciary. Recently, we had a debate on this. We had a discussion on the lack of women representation in the higher judiciary. Even at lower courts, I pointed out, I gave the data as well regarding the underrepresentation of women in the judicial system. So those who have that bitter experience, those who have seen that justice is not accessible, be it lawyers or judges or people, litigants in general, they might start perceiving the statute, the new statute, in a negative way. They might feel that the judicial system is not really fair. It is corrupt. It is favoring certain sections, discriminating against the rest. So that is the risk with the new statute and the symbolism attached with it. So this is a very valid counterpoint being raised by the writer. But as the Supreme Court has pointed out, and as former Chief Justice of India, D.Y. Chandrachud, pointed out, this change was necessary. It might be a minor change, but it does represent something very big and very symbolic. It represents the fairness, the equality of the Constitution, the very basic structure which is enshrined in the Constitution. It highlights the supremacy of the Constitution as well, given that the sword has been replaced with the Constitution in the hands of the Lady Justice. So this symbolic change could have far-reaching implications on the judicial system itself. It definitely triggers a debate about some of the perceived unfairness with the judiciary. For example, how the judiciary prioritizes certain cases, how the judiciary has often delayed hearing certain cases, or how certain judgments appear to be colored, right? So there has been criticism against the Indian judiciary as well, and it could pave the way for further debate, further controversy. So the changes that have been done to the statute does have far-reaching implications. So you can expect a possible question here, maybe under art and culture, because of the history of the statue of Lady Justice and the symbolism attached with the new statue which has been inaugurated, or maybe under polity itself. The symbolism of Lady Justice statue in courts goes far beyond iconography and art. Evaluate. So let's see if you guys can write a good answer based on what we have discussed. I've given you all the points, the facts and the analysis. Now all you have to do is structure those points into a good answer. Ensure you provide a good introduction, talk about maybe the history of Lady Justice in the introduction, or talk about the recent changes that has been done by the Supreme Court. Then in the body, present the historical interpretation of Lady Justice, why a change was necessary, and what is the new symbolism of the new statue of Lady Justice. Then the counter argument and a conclusion. So that is how you build a structured answer. So let's see if you can write a good answer, and please post your answers in the comments. Now let's move on to the next article. In the supplement section of Science and Tech section of Hindu, on page 2, we have another interesting article related to honey bees. This topic could be very relevant for environment and ecology. The article carries a headline. It says, new infectious diseases that are spreading amongst bees. It threatens the world economies. Now, how can honey bees threaten the global economy? How can honey bees disrupt the economies of several countries? That is the big question. So to understand this, we need to dive a little deep into the article and understand the ecological role of honey bees. I'm sure all of you would have studied since your school days that honeybees and many other insects, they play a critical role as pollinators. It's not just honeybees, but there are many other insects in the wild. For example, wasps, moths, beetles, flies. All these insects, especially the wild insects, they play a critical role in the process of pollination. They enable plant reproduction. So as they jump from plant to plant, as they land on the flowers, as they suck the nectar, right? They end up carrying the pollen and depositing it, which enables the propagation and thus initiates plant reproduction. And these insects play this critical role in our ecology as pollinators. Did you know that more than 75% of the food that we consume, the food crops, including cereals, pulses, etc., and the fruits and vegetables, they are all dependent on these insects for pollination. Studies have established that nearly 75% of what human beings consume around the world is a result of pollination. That highlights the critical role of these insects. If these insects were to go extinct, or if there were threats in the environment which could eliminate these insects, these pollinators, it will disrupt agriculture. It will disrupt modern agriculture and disrupt the global food chains. The food supply chains will be disrupted, leading to food shortages, which could increase food insecurity and cause food inflation and increase the prices of essential food commodities. So this is how any threat to a pollinator could disrupt the economy of a nation and possibly disrupt the global economy itself. In fact, certain studies have even pointed out that if bees were to be driven towards extinction, that would mean the end of modern agriculture as well. That would possibly mean an apocalyptic event which could end human civilization itself. That is the critical role of pollinators, especially that of bees. Now, let's understand the various threats being faced by them. Since these pollinators play such a crucial role in the global agricultural nutritional system, we need to understand what are the threats present, and we should tackle those threats. The biggest threat, of course, is the excessive usage of toxic pesticides. The large-scale use of pesticides has been the single biggest threat for some of the pollinators. We started using pesticides to keep away unnecessary pests and to increase productivity. But the very same modern agricultural practice has been detrimental to pollinators such as the bees. The next biggest threat is pollution. The large-scale air pollution, water pollution, the environmental pollution that we have caused through anthropogenic activities is another big threat. Then, of course, global warming and climate change. The long-term climate change triggered again by anthropogenic activities, the rising temperatures, the changing weather patterns, extreme weather events, they disrupt the life cycle of these insects. So these are the known threats to pollinators such as the bees. Now there is another emerging threat, that is infectious diseases. Infectious diseases, which has started emerging of late, again as a result of anthropogenic activities, has become a major concern. Now let us understand why it is a new emerging threat. How come infectious diseases weren't a big threat before? But why is it a threat now, especially in today's times? Why is infectious diseases, right? Why are we seeing more outbreaks, more spread of such pathogens, deadly pathogens, which could affect even pollinators, right? That is what we need to learn and understand. The prime reason here is the loss of habitat. Habitat loss, along with climate change, plays a critical role in the emergence of new pathogens, in the spread of the pathogens, and eventually this affects the pollinators. So to understand this, we need to look at research data. We can't simply make blind arguments. We can't presume things. We need to rely on established data. But currently, most of the scientific research on bees is based on the Western cultivated bee population. See, when we look at the bee population in the world, we can divide this broadly into two categories. You have the wild indigenous bees. For example, in India, did you know there are 700 species of bees? Those are the wild native varieties. There are 4 which are native to India, which are indigenous to India. The rest are the wild bees which are cultivated as part of apiculture. As the honey produced by the bees is a commodity, a valuable commodity, apiculture has been promoted by countries around the world, and it's primarily Western governments which championed apiculture since several decades, and they have been responsible for a large bee population which is not wild, which is cultivated. Most of the scientific research is limited to the Western bee population, which is largely cultivated bee population. But if you look at countries like India, tropical areas, look at the indigenous diverse variety of bee species present, we don't have enough studies, enough research material available. But the studies are very clear, the data is very clear, that wild bees and other wild pollinators are at greater risk because of the cultivated bee population. Because of the cultivated bees, which are of Western variant, there is a clear threat, a greater threat to the wild bees, the indigenous variety of bees, and to the larger wild pollinator population, including other wild insects which act as key pollinators. Because there are several diseases which have been noted in cultivated bee population, which is now spilling over and jumping into the wild population as well. And there is a spillback. We call this the parasite spillover spillback effect. Wild bees and managed bees or cultivated bees, they have a different set of susceptibility or vulnerability to diseases. Managed bees have been prone to various infections and pathogens. In fact, studies have shown, Western studies clearly establish that cultivated bees, they are reservoirs of viral pathogens. Just like bats, civet cats and pigs and certain birds are considered as reservoirs of pathogens. Similarly, the cultivated bee population, particularly the Western kind, they are considered as reservoirs of viral pathogens, meaning they will play a critical role in transmitting those pathogens. Now, if the habitat is large enough, let's say we have a very large, diverse habitat. In such case, these cultivated bees may not easily transmit the pathogen to wild bees and wild pollinators because there is enough space available. The pollinators are spread out, they don't usually come in contact, and there is no transmission of the pathogen, it's very limited. But what if the habitat is reducing? What if there is significant habitat loss due to deforestation, due to forest fires, due to large-scale urbanization, industrialization? We are destroying our forests, our biodiversity. We are directly contributing to loss of habitat. And significant habitat loss reduces the space available for these pollinators. So now, both the managed bees, which are carrying deadly pathogens, and the wild bees, which are critical for the process of pollination, they will start sharing the same habitat, meaning they will come in contact. There are greater chances of them coming in contact with each other, thus increasing the chances of a spillover of the parasite. This is what we call as parasite spillover effect. When managed cultivated bees, which are carrying deadly pathogens, come in contact with wild bees and spread the pathogen, this is called a spillover. A spillover from the cultivated population to the wild population. Now, within the wild population, since they are never exposed to these new pathogens, the impact would be higher. It could be having a deadly impact on their population. And also don't forget, these pathogens will start mutating at a faster rate. Within the wild population of bees and other wild pollinators, the pathogens could undergo deadly mutations, acquire more lethality, and there could be a spill back. Now, these mutated pathogens will spill back not just to the cultivated bee population, but into other wild pollinators. Other wild pollinators like moths, wasps, and beetles. Now, they could be at greater risk because the wild bee population could spill over and spill back this effect to the other wild pollinators, thus compromising all the pollinating insects. So this is the serious risk that we are facing right now. We are headed towards a possible scenario where bees face an existential threat because of the emergent diseases as a result of pathogen spillover and spillback effect. So on one hand, we have cultivated a lot of bee population for apiculture to produce honey, which has become very susceptible to diseases and pathogens. They have become reservoirs of these pathogens. Due to habitat destruction, habitat loss, and climate change, the cultivated bees are coming in more contact with the wild bees and spreading the pathogens, which is parasite spillover. These pathogens are mutating in the wild bee population, and now it is spilling back into other wild pollinators and infecting moths, wasps, and beetles as well. So this parasite spillover spillback effect is the single biggest threat right now to modern day agriculture. Modern day agriculture may not even exist if the pollinators are driven towards extinction because of such deadly diseases. And see, this is not just a stuff of science fiction, or it's not just a futuristic scenario. It is something that we have already dealt with. There have been deadly pathogens in the past which have wiped out native indigenous population of bees and other pollinators. And I can give you examples as well. For example, there are viruses which have caused deformation of the wing of these pollinators, affecting their ability to fly. And if they can't fly, how will they pollinate? The black queen virus, right? It had a deadly impact on pollinator species. In fact, both these pathogens, they were traced to cultivated bee population. Cultivated bees in Western agricultural systems, they were responsible for the transmission and spread of these deadly pathogens. Now, coming to India, let's look at this from India's perspective. I told you that India has around 700 bee species, and there are 4 especially which are native, which are indigenous. You can please write this down as well. It could be important for prelims. UPSC can ask you, which are the 4 indigenous bee species in India? Please make a note. Asiatic honey bee, the most important, especially for pollination, for agriculture. Asiatic honey bee is the most important bee species. The giant rock bee, dwarf honey bee, and the stingless bee. These are the 4 indigenous varieties of bees. Now, Western bees were introduced in India as well in 1980s as part of apiculture. India was promoting a sweet revolution, a golden revolution to increase the production of honey. And to increase honey productivity, we brought in the Western bee variant, the cultivated, the modified variant from the West was introduced in India in 1983. And studies in India are showing the detrimental impact. The impact of introduction of Western cultivated bees on native bee population in the country. See, for example, in Kolhapur, in Maharashtra, bee farmers who would harvest the forest honey produced by the wild bees, they were producing almost 8 to 10 tons of honey. Now, after the introduction of Western cultivated bees, they have seen a destruction of the native bee species, and today the collection of forest honey has dropped to just 1 ton in Kolhapur in Maharashtra. Researchers are believing that this is an impact of the Western cultivated bees having an impact on the native bee population. In 1990s, we saw the spread of a deadly pathogen, the Thai scabrode virus, a deadly outbreak amongst the bee population that wiped out 90% of Asiatic honeybee population. It affected not just India, but many Asian countries were affected. China, Vietnam, they all saw a significant reduction in the honeybee population. The Asiatic honeybee was extremely vulnerable to the Thai scabrous virus. It essentially killed the larva. The larva of the bees would not survive if the bees were infected with this deadly virus, posing the single biggest threat for the very existence and survival of the Asiatic honeybee, which is so crucial for farming in Asian countries. Recently, we saw a re-emergence of this deadly pathogen in Telangana. In 2021, 3 decades after the initial outbreak, we saw a fresh outbreak in Telangana. So the risk present is very real. And most studies are indicating that these pathogens are spreading to wild population from the cultivated western bee population. And also bee migration has something to do with this. The migratory route of the bees is very important. See, bee cultivators in India who cultivate the western bee variant, they often migrate with the bees. They allow the bees to migrate naturally. And when they migrate, they carry them through various farm fields so they can access the best flowers and get the best nectar. For example, in northern parts of India, the beekeepers, the bee collectors, what they do, they drive the bees in such a way that they pass through mustard fields and sunflower fields. Now, this is where native indigenous bees are also found. But the western cultivated bees will take over this habitat, and the limited space available will bring them in contact with the local bee population, spreading the pathogens to them and wiping out the native population. We have seen this happen in Jammu and Kashmir as well, where bee cultivators take the cultivated bees and allow them to migrate through apple orchards. And it has had an impact on the bumblebee population, the native bumblebee variant. Almost studies have established that 40% of bumblebee species in Indian Himalayas could be wiped out by 2050. By the middle of the century, studies estimate a 90% habitat reduction. And this could lead to elimination of 40% of bumblebee population. So these are very serious threats. The data is very clear, the studies, the patterns are very clear that cultivated bees and habitat destruction, climate change, large-scale use of pesticides and pollution combined together could drive the bee population towards almost extinction. And this will disrupt pollination, and this could disrupt the entire agricultural system. So this can shake economies, it can break down the global economic system and the global food supply chains. So that is why there is a need for enhanced research and surveillance. Countries have to maintain enhanced research and surveillance. Now you might ask, sir, isn't it difficult to monitor and track all the bees? Insects are very small, it's almost practically impossible to track the bee population. Yes, you're absolutely right if that is your question. But please understand, wild bees are difficult to track. Wild pollinators, yes, they are difficult to study. But you can at least keep better surveillance on cultivated bee colonies. The bee farms, they can be brought under enhanced monitoring and surveillance to immediately look out for any new emerging pathogens. If the government can maintain better surveillance with the bee farmers and keep a check on the bee farms present in the country, look out for emergent pathogens and new diseases coming up and restrict them to the farms itself. This will help in preventing the spread to the wild bee population and further into the wild pollinator population. So you can prevent the parasite spillover and spillback effect by controlling the cultivated bee population and by monitoring the cultivated bees. So that is the way forward. So based on this, you can expect a mains question as well, given how important this issue is for environment ecology, right? You can anticipate a question. New infectious diseases amongst bees threaten world's economies. Discuss in detail. That's why I have given you a detailed explanation, gone beyond the article as well. So you can use all the data that I have mentioned regarding the bee population, the variety of bees, and the role of pollinators in the global economy, and how it is seeing a disruption. What are the threats to the bee population, and especially emerging diseases, how does it pose a threat? So if you can bring all these points into your answer, that will make for a good mains answer. So I hope the topic is clear to everyone. Now let's move on to the next article on page number 8. recently in the state of Kerala, there was a big controversy. Two IAS officers were suspended by the Kerala government. Two IAS officers were suspended by the government of Kerala. I'm sure some of you would be aware of the development. Now, first, let's understand why were these IAS officers suspended? What were the grounds of their suspension? Then we'll understand the rules governing the conduct of All India services. These two IAS officers, N. Prashant and K. Gopal Krishnan, you can see them in the images over here. Their recent conduct was found to be in violation of All India Services Conduct Rules. Now, as aspiring civil servants, this topic is extremely important for you, not just for the exam, but even later after you clear the exam. Whatever we discuss under this article will help you not only in governance, but it could help you in your ethics paper as well, in GS paper 4. Because the violations that has been cited by the government of Kerala against these suspended IAS officers highlights issues of ethics, integrity concerning the behavior, the conduct of these two officers. The allegation against N. Prashant was that N. Prashant took to social media and publicly criticized his senior. He made baseless allegations, allegedly, according to allegations by the Kerala state government. He took to social media and made allegations against the additional chief secretary and accused him of carrying out a defamatory campaign against him. So essentially, the inter-service issue, which was supposed to be within the bureaucracy, spilled out into the public, where a mid-ranking officer was publicly accusing a senior-ranking IAS officer of inappropriate conduct. Now, this was seen as a violation of the conduct rules laid down for All India services, and the Kerala government determined that this was unbecoming of an officer of the service. And on these grounds, he has been suspended by the Kerala government. Then if you look at K. Gopal Krishnan, the other suspended IAS officer, he allegedly created a WhatsApp group, again on social media obviously. He created a WhatsApp group named Mallu Hindu Officers. The allegation is that he created a religion-based WhatsApp group, which cannot be acceptable when it comes to a high-ranking IAS officer, right? Civil servants are expected to be impartial. They're expected to uphold the highest levels of ethics, integrity, probity in public life and as well as in private life. Because what you do in your private life will impact your public standing as well. So there are few basic expectations of conduct from civil servants, particularly from IAS officers, which are governed by All India Services Conduct Rules. So Kerala government determined that this instance of a IAS officer creating a WhatsApp group on religious lines, trying to create a religious group, was in direct violation of the Code of Conduct for All India Civil Services. See, this officer defended himself. Gopal Krishnan, he said that his phone had been hacked and he did not create this WhatsApp group, and instead it was a hacker who had created this WhatsApp group in his phone. But these statements have fallen apart because initial police inquiry and cyber forensics have established that the officer, before handing over his phone to the police for inquiry, he has erased all the data and carried out a factory reset, which possibly points towards the guilt of the officer as well. So both these cases which have come up highlights very serious instances that violates All India Services Conduct Rules of 1968, the AIS rules. This is what governs the conduct of All India Civil Services, such as IAS, IPS, and even Indian Forest Service. The conduct of these All India Civil Services is governed by All India Services Conduct Rules of 1968. So in the first case, Kerala government determined that the IAS officer had carried out action which was unbecoming of a civil servant because he alleged publicly against his senior, which was a case of insubordination, which was a case of violation of established guidelines. And on those grounds, he had been suspended. In the second case, the IAS officer had shown a religious affiliation, a religious bias, which affects the standing of the officer, which brings his impartiality into question, his neutrality into question. And on those grounds, he has been removed or suspended for now by the Kerala government. Now, let's look at some of the key provisions of the conduct rules, the All India Services Conduct Rules of 1968. I'll take you through some of the key points, and then we will identify some issues present over here. There are some critical flaws as well. So please make a note of this. Point number 1. Under the conduct rules, IAS, IPS and Indian Forest Service officers are expected to maintain the highest standards of ethics, integrity, honesty, political neutrality, accountability and transparency. Now, these are various ethical values that you study in your ethics paper. As all India civil servants, they are expected to be honest, to uphold integrity, to ensure they are politically neutral, do not show any bias towards a political party or a leader. This obviously includes religious neutrality as well. You can't discriminate against anyone on the basis of religion, on the basis of caste, right? An IAS officer has to be neutral and should be accountable, should be transparent, and should be anonymous as well. In fact, in all my classes, right, I always advise my students to ensure they develop the value of neutrality. Because see, individually, in our private lives, we all have our biases. We could have a certain political inclination, a certain religious inclination, but that is an aspect limited to our private life. It should be confined within the boundaries of our homes, our private space. But once you're in the public domain, once you become a civil servant, right, your private life also comes into question. What you do in your private life has an impact on your public standing. And especially in your public role, you cannot have any kind of affiliations and biases. Because you're not here to serve a religion, to serve a god, to serve any leader, or to serve any government. You are here to serve the Constitution of India. For civil servants, what is supreme is the Constitution, nothing else. Governments come and go, prime ministers come and go, chief ministers come and go. Civil servants are expected to remain neutral and committed to the Constitution, the principles of the Constitution. In fact, that is one of the conduct rules. You are expected to uphold the supremacy of constitutional values. The Constitution is supreme for a civil servant. The government is not supreme. The leaders are not supreme. A religion is not supreme. A God is not supreme. It is the Constitution which is supreme to a civil servant. Now, this is a very, very important aspect. You are expected to remain politically neutral, religiously neutral as well, right? In general, you can't discriminate. You can't show any of your personal affiliations, biases in your public space. You should uphold the highest standards of ethics and integrity. Discharge your duties. The conduct rule says that officers can engage with media. They can engage with public media, but only to discharge official work. For example, to spread awareness about a government program, or to spread awareness about a concern or a issue or a certain threat which could affect the people. Let's say you are a SP of a district, and if there are rumors spreading that a riot has broken out, then the SP has an obligation, right, to address the media, to engage all forms of media, including social media, to counter that rumor and dismiss that as a fake news, right? So officers are allowed to engage with media, which obviously includes social media as well, because conduct rules have been amended time to time. But this engagement with media should be in the bona fide discharge of one's duties. You can't engage with media for random purposes, to glorify yourself, to publicize your own achievement, to become a social media star. Instead, you have to engage with media to discharge your duties. Let's say there is an early warning about a cyclone, right? Since you head the disaster management authority at the district level, the DC, who's an IAS officer, would be expected to engage with the media to spread the alert and ensure people are evacuated. That is when officers can engage with the media, including social media, but not for personal reasons, not to glorify oneself, not to bring service issues or any service-related grievance into the public domain. That is not tolerated, allowed under the conduct rules. Similarly, you can't criticize the government and government policies. You may disagree with the leadership. You may disagree with the political class, the executive, but you can't air your opinion publicly, right? You can't go publicly in the media and criticize government policies and government initiatives. That again is seen as a violation of the conduct rules. And similarly, you can't go to court or you can't go to the press without the sanction of the government if you have a grievance or an issue. There are tribunals, there are administrative tribunals present where you can air your grievance. There are processes, systems created where officers can raise their issues, service-related issues. If you, let's say, have an issue with your superior, right, or with a certain minister or with a senior officer, a chief secretary or additional chief secretary, those grievances can be aired within the system and there is a process to be followed. You can't go to the public, you can't go to the media and complain about it. You can't go file a court case without the sanction of the government, without prior approval of the government. These are basic rules of conduct expected from an All India civil servant. But there is one provision which is like a omnibus clause. It's like an umbrella clause or all-encompassing clause which says that any act which is unbecoming of an officer, of a member of the service, All India services, this could also be a ground for suspension. Now, this is a very vague term. Now, what is unbecoming of an officer of who is a member of the civil services? This will be determined obviously by the government. So generally, these conduct rules will be applied on lower and mid-level officers by senior officers and the political class. Now, there is a possibility of this being misused because if you look at the conduct rules, it doesn't have any specific guidelines. There's no explicit do's and don'ts when it comes to social media. Even though it has been updated time to time, conduct rules have been amended regularly to ensure that all changes are included in it. But it doesn't have any explicit guidelines or do's and don'ts when it comes to engagement with social media. So that creates a gap. Plus the omnibus clause that any act which is unbecoming of a member of the service, this can be easily misinterpreted. It's very subjective. There's a lot of scope for discretion. Senior officers and the political class can determine what qualifies as unbecoming of a member of service. So this vague term could be misused to target mid-level and junior officers, and this is a major issue present with the conduct rules. There are no specific guidelines. It's not explicit. It provides for these broad values and expectations and even provides an omnibus clause which is not clearly defined. There are no ground rules laid down over here. So there is a lot of scope for interpretation, and usually the senior bureaucracy or the political class could misuse this to target certain bureaucrats whom they do not like or who do not align with the ruling party. So this has been a matter of concern. So that is why there is a need to review and update the conduct rules. For example, the guidelines have to be specific, especially when it comes to usage of social media. Right? Today, many officers are on social media having an active presence. Not just their official account, but they also have a private account where they share their personal life on social media. So there's no harm in that as long as it doesn't violate the conduct rules. But the conduct rules needs to be more specific as to what officers can share. Because see, one important value in a civil servant is the value of anonymity. Before the digital era, officers would be largely anonymous. They wouldn't come out and claim credit for what they were doing, or they wouldn't exaggerate their own achievements, or they wouldn't project their powerful new life. But unfortunately, that has become the new trend. You might have seen how several toppers in recent years or the young officers who have entered the service, right? They gain immense popularity on social media. Again, no harm in that. But the point is, how are they using the platform? If they are using it for self-glorification, That is actually a violation of the value of anonymity. As a civil servant, you're expected to be anonymous, right? Your actions should speak for yourself. You should remain anonymous. The identity of the officer should be anonymous largely. Their work, their public work, their actual action should speak. That should show the impact. But unfortunately, today, social media is changing this. So several superstar civil servants are grabbing the media attention, and this is a distraction for the civil services. It erases the value of anonymity, right? And that is why specific guidelines are needed. The government is at fault. The government has to update the All India Services Conduct Rules, provide specific guidelines for social media usage. What you can share on public account, what you can share on your private account. This has to be clearly specified. The term unbecoming of a member of service should be narrowed down based on past instances of proven misbehavior where officers have been suspended or removed from service as well. A clear guideline has to be provided so that there is no scope for misuse or misinterpretation of the provision. And in general, officers themselves have to uphold the highest levels of ethics, honesty, and integrity, which means you have to remain completely neutral politically. You should not show any religious affiliations, any bias towards any community, right? Your personal affiliations should remain personal as part of your private life, not a part of your public life. You should remain anonymous. Anonymity is a great value for a civil servant, which unfortunately is changing because of the glorification of civil servants and the toppers of civil services exam. So this has to change, and for that, the conduct rules has to be updated. So that is what we take away from this important article. Now let's quickly look at the smaller articles in today's paper. On the front page itself, we have an article referring to the deadly situation in Manipur. Manipur has erupted again. Large-scale violence has been reported. There are heightened tensions again in Manipur. As we have discussed several times, of course, I'm not going into the background again because we have covered this topic several times in the past. So Manipur's ethnic violence is rooted in the tensions and conflict between the majority Meiteis and the Kuki-Zo community. The Meiteis, who dominate the Imphal Valley, they are at conflict with the Kuki-Zo minorities, who are a scheduled tribe in the hill areas of Manipur. So since 2023, there has been ethnic clashes between both the sides. Armed groups on both sides have been targeting each other, resulting in a deadly security situation, which affects India's external and as well as internal security. So recently, there was a concerning development. If you remember, a few days ago, we spoke about the CRPF having an encounter with Kuki armed groups. I mentioned a key development in the Hindu analysis that CRPF, which has been deployed to maintain peace and stability in Manipur, it got involved in an encounter where around 10 to 11 Kuki armed insurgents were killed. During this encounter, the other Kuki insurgents who escaped, they had kidnapped around 6 people from the Meitei community, including women and children, including elderly women and children. Now, after a few days, their bodies are being found in rivers. In one of the rivers bordering Assam, a few of the bodies were discovered a few days earlier, and now the report says 2 more bodies also have been found. And reports indicate these bodies could be of those who were kidnapped by alleged Kuki insurgents. So this has triggered the Meiteis, and now violence has again broken out. There have been large-scale protests, violent clashes between the communities. So even the Indian Army has now been called in to contain the situation. So Manipur has already been dealing with a very sensitive situation where Assam Rifles, a paramilitary force, was dealing with the internal security of the region. Along with that, CRPF had been brought in by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And now Indian Army also is being called in to stabilize the situation and to contain the violence. So following these recent incidents and the recent escalation in violence, the controversial AFSPA has been brought back in some of the jurisdictions of few police stations. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act that gives extraordinary powers to security forces, including the license to kill. It gives a legal immunity to security forces to open fire and kill suspects, and that provides legal protection from any prosecution for the security forces. This often has been controversial, and AFSPA had been removed from some of the stable areas in Northeast India. But now, given the escalation following these incidents, AFSPA has been brought back in some of the areas in Manipur, which has also led to protests by the local communities. So we need to wait and watch how this develops. So it's just an update for you. So we will continue to track this story because this is a big development. What has happened in the last 2 weeks represents a further escalation of tensions, and we might witness a new cycle of violence between Meiteis and the Kukis armed groups. So let's continue to track this story. Now let's look at another article on the front page. This is related to COP29, the Conference of Parties 29 to UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is taking place at Baku in Azerbaijan. India has expressed its frustration at COP29 regarding the lack of progress at the climate change summit, especially with regard to mitigation efforts. There has been absolutely no progress. In fact, this has become the repeat story of most of the climate change summits. Most climate change summits don't come out with any major outcome. This is mainly due to the difference between the developed countries and developing countries. Developing countries like India, all the global south countries, the developing, underdeveloped countries, they have been demanding that developed countries should be held accountable for their historical responsibilities. Because developed industrialized nations, they are mainly responsible for historical emissions. So the expectation from the global south, from developing nations, is that developed countries should provide them with finance, provide them with technology, especially clean, renewable technology, and also provide capacity building so that developing underdeveloped countries can transition into cleaner economies and implement mitigation efforts to mitigate the adverse impact of climate change. This has been a long-standing demand. In fact, at COP27 in Egypt, 2 years ago, when Egypt hosted the 27th Conference of Parties at Sharm el-Sheikh, an initiative had been set up for mitigation finance known as the MWP, the Mitigation Work Program. Mitigation Work Program was set up so that funds and technology can be transferred from developed countries towards developing nations, so that a mechanism can be created where developing underdeveloped countries can receive assistance and support from developed countries to aid their mitigation efforts. But this has not happened. Developed countries have not been providing adequate finance, or they're not sharing technology with developing underdeveloped countries. And there is a complete deadlock at the climate change summit. There has been no progress at all. So India has come out and criticized the lack of progress. That shows India's frustration as well with the lack of progress being seen at the climate change summit. So again, this is an update for you. We will continue to track this story. Once the summit is over, we will conduct a thorough analysis of the outcomes of COP29. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at 3 small articles. On the front page, we have a very, very important development, a historic development for India. India's DRDO has successfully conducted the first ever hypersonic missile test. Now, this puts India in an elite category because very few countries have tested and proven their hypersonic missile capabilities. So what exactly is a hypersonic missile? A hypersonic missile is a missile which can travel at a speed of more than 5 times the speed of sound, or essentially Mach 5. When we say Mach 1, it refers to the speed of sound. So anything above speed of sound is represented as Mach 1, Mach 2, Mach 3, etc. So if a projectile can travel at a speed of more than 5 times the speed of sound or at a speed of more than Mach 5, this category of travel, right, refers to hypersonic travel. So hypersonic missiles have a unique advantage compared to your ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles, they take a parabolic trajectory. They take a parabolic path. They even enter outer space briefly. When you launch a ballistic missile at a target, it crosses the atmosphere, briefly enters outer space and makes a re-entry into the atmosphere to strike at the target. So ballistic missiles take a much longer path and they are quite easily detectable. So enemy air defense systems can detect the incoming ballistic missile and even launch countermeasures, as we saw recently between Israel and Iran. When Iran launched ballistic missiles at Israel, Israel could detect them easily and intercept them as well. Today, most major military powers have decent air defense through which they can take down through which they can even take down incoming ballistic missiles. And another problem with ballistic missiles is that they are not very maneuverable. Right? Once you launch them towards a target, the maneuverability of a ballistic missile is very limited. Once the target is set, once there is a predetermined target, ballistic missiles are not easily maneuverable in flight. This is where hypersonic missile offers a big advantage. They are not only super fast because they are traveling at Mach 5 and above, right? They can easily evade enemy radar and enemy interception purely because of their speed. And more importantly, they fly closer to the earth. They fly very close to the ground and they can even glide. And this gives maneuverability. You can maneuver the missile in flight towards the right target, make it more precise. That is why cruise missiles are also more effective, because cruise missiles also travel at subsonic speeds and they fly closer to the ground, evading radar detection, evading enemy air defenses, and they are maneuverable in flight. Similarly, hypersonic missiles, they travel much, much faster than your cruise missiles and they fly closer to the ground, evading enemy radar detection, and more importantly, you can maneuver them in flight. Is that clear? So such a hypersonic missile can carry all types of warheads, a conventional warhead or even a nuclear warhead. So this is why India's test of hypersonic missile with a possible range of 1,500 kilometers is a historic development. Very few countries have this capability. So now let me know if you are aware of which countries are having this capability. I'm giving you a practice question. There are 5 countries listed here with the options given. Now you have to tell me in the comments which countries have proven hypersonic missile capabilities amongst the 5 given countries. Many countries are pursuing them. Some already possess them. Some have already used hypersonic missiles in conflict. It has been recently in news as well. So let me know the correct answer and join my Telegram channel. I will give you the answer later. If you don't get the answer right, don't worry, join my Telegram channel. I'll share the PDF of the session as well. And later, I'll give you the answer, including the answer for yesterday's question. So scan the QR code and join my Telegram channel. Now coming to the next article. The government of India is planning to turn Andaman and Nicobar into a major export hub for tuna fish. I hope you know that tuna has a massive market. It's one of the most in-demand fish around the world. Very tasty, known for its unique texture and flavor. There are different variants of tuna, and Indian Ocean is blessed with a significant resource of the tuna. It is considered as the second largest reserve of the tuna fish, accounting for nearly 21% of the global produce. The Indian Ocean contains nearly 21% of the global produce of tuna fish. India is also a major exporter, and the data shows that there has been a significant jump in tuna exports. According to Government of India, we have seen a jump of 31.83% in the previous fiscal. And there is greater opportunity if we can improve the infrastructure at Andaman Nicobar. Since Indian Ocean is a rich hunting ground for tuna, different varieties of tuna is found, from skipjack to the big eye, the neretic tuna. There are different variants. They're all found in large numbers in the Indian Ocean, and India has a great opportunity at Andaman Nicobar. Right now, we are struggling a bit compared to other countries because we don't have good infrastructure. Because for such large-scale fishing, you need modern infrastructure. You need modern fishing practices, which are environmentally sustainable. You need good storage and warehousing facilities, including cold storage. You need food processing industries, which can harvest the fish meat and process it into different products and increase the shelf life. This is how many countries have become leading exporters, driving their economy just based on fish exports. But India is not fulfilling its potential. We are doing quite well. We are still exporting around $88 million of tuna from the country, but there is much more potential given the large size of our exclusive economic zone. Especially Andaman Nicobar Islands, they get their own EEZ, and there is a rich presence of different variants of tuna present in the waters of Andaman Nicobar. So if we create modern infrastructure with modern fishing, better cold storage, warehousing facilities, and a food processing industry and a market, then India could be one of the leaders in tuna exports, and Andaman Nicobar could become the hub of tuna exports. So that is the ambitious plan of the government of India. Coming to the last article, on the supplement page of Science and Tech section, there is this image published by the Hindu depicting a floating solar plant. This is in Indonesia. You are looking at the largest floating solar plant in Southeast Asia. In the entire Southeast Asia region, this would be the largest floating solar plant. So there might be a possible factual question, if at all. So please make a note. It is in Indonesia at Purwakarta. It has been set up at the Sirata Dam by using the reservoir waters of Sirata Dam, which is located in West Java province in Purwakarta. Indonesia has built the largest floating solar farm in Southeast Asia region. It has been built with assistance from United Arab Emirates. It's part of the joint collaboration between Indonesia and UAE. And please note down the name and location. That should be more than sufficient. So this completes my detailed analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. I hope you guys have enjoyed the session, understood all the topics, and please let me know if you have any questions and doubts. I can spare a few minutes to look at some questions, and after that we can end the session for today. Any specific doubts, any questions regarding what we have studied today? Please let me know. All right. I don't see any questions as such. So I hope that you have understood everything. And if you did like the session, please press the like button, share your comments, and do subscribe to our channel. So see you in the next session. Till then, take care. Have a good day.